Welcome once again, everybody present here. As you know that I had already clarified the meaning of nationalism in Europe as well as nationalism in India. But here we are discussing about nationalism in India. But let me once again have a clarification of the term. Nationalism in Europe was concerned with the formation of nation state at the place of multinational, multi-dynastic rule in a big empire, and in India the nationalism was concerned with the freedom of India against colonial rule. And we had also discussed about the meaning of nation and nationalism, the feeling of love, devotion, and pride and patriotism towards his nation was considered to be the prerequisites. Either it was concerned with the formation of nation state in Europe in one hand, or either making India free against the colonial rule. So, what are the subject matters or the contents we have to discuss about in this chapter, Nationalism in India? We will see here. We will see the introduction of the chapter. Then we will study about the First World War, Khilafat and non-cooperation movement. Then we will study about the different strands within the movement. When the non-cooperation movement started, how did the different groups in the society participated in the non-cooperation movement organized by the Mahatma Gandhi, and what were their experiences and how did they perceive the meaning of Swaraj. And then another next movement which was organized by Mahatma Gandhi in 1930, that was the civil disobedience movement. And the lastly we will consider the sense of collective belongingness, means how did the nation India got its shape and what sort of measures were taken by the patriotic and the nationalist people in India, that India could form a shape of human figure, and what sort of new songs and new symbols and new flags and the statue of Bharat Mata, all and painting of Bharat Mata were created by nationalists that given the concrete shape of the nation India. Because you already know that there was no country named India prior to the British rule, and it was due to the British rule that India was got united under one empire, and that is British Empire. But the whole of the India was not under their control. And during the freedom struggle, the sense of collective belongingness were created, and slowly all the sections and different parts of the country started to feel that they are the citizen of one country and nation, India, and they have to make it free. But it became possible only by the help of Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress Party. Now let us discuss here nationalism. Here it is written that nationalism is the feeling of oneness among the people living a territory. So, if a group of people are living in a territory in a particular area and they are bound together, they are attached with each other with a notion of belongingness to a particular nation, that is known as the nationalism. If they are feeling themselves dejected, if they feel themselves separate from each other, then nation cannot be formed. So from the formation of nation, if people of a given area having common identities among themselves, then they will be feeling bound to each other, tied to each other, and then there will be the formation of nation. As far as the simple meaning of nationalism is concerned, it is called that nationalism is the loyalty and devotion to a nation. In this chapter, we will pick up the story from the 1920s and study the non-cooperation movement and civil disobedience movements. So, in this chapter, Nationalism of India, you know that India had to wage a long war of freedom struggle against the Britishers, and at the many different stages of the history, from starting from 17th century. I mean. People and living in India in different sections and different groups were fighting against Britishers, but their movements were being suppressed and win over by the Britishers, because that movements were not well organized and well planned, and there is no any strategy. But slowly, the movements, the first big call for the freedom of India came in the form of Sepoy immunity in 1857, but it was also curbed by the Britishers. But Here we will study the freedom struggle, freedom movement of India since 1920s, and here we will show the role of Mahatma Gandhi in organizing three big movements and how did India have a big impact on the British rule, which ultimately resulted in being India free. So the chapter begins with the uh, starting of the First World War. That the First World War had taken place in 1914 and it had lasted up to 1918. And the British Empire, the British had also participated in First World War on the Allied side, and Indian soldier, since Indian soldier were also utilized in the First World War on the side of the Britishers. So, what sort of effect was there on the India during this World War? We will see, and after that, what sort of and what types of movements were organized by the Indians under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. So here it is. The First World War created a new economic and political situation in India. So First World War was such a war which had a devastating effect on the human lives, and there was huge loss of property as well as wealth. And although the Allied power won, but there was devastating effect on the humankinds. So India was directly not involved in the First World War, but Britain was involved in the First World War. But since the Britain had established colony in India, and India was under the British rule, so it was also felt the effect of the First World War. But what sort of the effects were there on India? We will see here. The British imposed war expenditure on India. As you know that if we need to organize a simple thing, then we need a money, and then you think about the organizing as a war. And there is need of mass scale level of needs of weapons and bombs and armaments. So for purchasing all this and utilizing in the war, there is need of huge amount of money. So how can this money can be collected since India was under the rule of Britishers? So to meet this expenditure, they imposed war expenditure on India. How did they impose war expenditure on India? They increased uh, they introduced income tax, and they also custom duties were also raised. So income tax is imposed on the person whose income, there is something income, and the government decides the limit, that after this limit, if anybody makes income more than it, he or she has to pay the income tax. Custom duties means it is the duty which is levied on the goods and which are exported and imported, or transported from one place to another place. So, to meet the war expenditure, the Britishers introduced a new form of tax that is called income tax, and they also raised the custom duties. Then, prices of essential goods doubled during the war period. So, here we are discussing about the what was the effect of First World War on India, what sort of new economic and political situation created in India. So first of all, we see that the income tax was introduced, custom duties were raised, then the pricing of essential goods also doubled because lots of money was being invested in the war expenditure. Forced recruitment was made it into the British Indian Army. As you know that the India was such a country where under the rule of the Britishers, but in army all the personals were not going to be the Britishers. Britishers were only going to be officers, and the sepoy or the soldiers were going to be the Indians, and they were recruited by the Britishers. And if you will serve the British army, you will be paid such a amount. Since Indians people had not any sense of loyalty toward their nation, there was no any sense of nationalism. There was no any sense of a concept of nation India. So whosoever were going to pay them money, they were going to serve them. So Britishers has noticed that India is such a country where small and big states are there, and each and every state has enmity among themselves, and they used to fight with each other. So there is no sense of a country like India. So if anybody pay the salary, the people of the India will serve to that army. So they utilize the Indian people by recruiting them in as a army personnel, and uh, officers posts were only reserved for the Britishers. So there was need of a large number of army personnel. So they started to recruit the Indian as a army personnel forcefully, because they were needed to be sent into the war fronts in First World War. Crops failure resulted in the shortage of food materials. Influenza epidemic spread in many parts of India. Millions of people lost their lives. So the First World War had a very critical effect on the society and the polity and the economy of India, because we see here, to meet the war expenditure, the income tax was introduced, the custom duties were raised, prices of essential goods doubled, forced recruitment were done in the countryside in Indian Army. Crops, there was going to be the crops failure and shortage of food materials. There was also the spread of epidemic in influenza. In that period of time, the medical condition of the country was not so much developed enough to meet such types of epidemic. When such types of epidemic spread, peoples were in large quantity were killed, and millions of people lost their lives. So we see that the effect of the war on India, that what sort of social and political situation were created in India. And you know already that First World War was in between 1914 to 1918, and meanwhile the Mahatma Gandhi returned from the South Africa in 1915. He introduced a new powerful method of struggle called Satyagraha. So there is going to be the entry of a very popular figure, and now we know him that as Raspita Mahatma Gandhi. So he returned from South Africa in 1915, and he traveled long distances and remote parts of India, and saw the effects of the British rules, how the people or the peasants or the workers working the factory were experiencing the brutal effect of the British Empire. And he noticed and visited that places, and then he planned that how to start the movements against the Britishers. And he had also a novel idea of movement that is known as Satyagraha, which we will discuss later. So, in this topic, we discussed that what were the effect of the First World War on Indian economy and politics, and when did Mahatma Gandhi return to India, and what sort of new movements he started in India with a new symbol of new system of movement with the help of Satyagraha. Okay.